bad news is that they pinged me and I've got to self-isolate.
On his own, as the clock ticks down to one of the most momentous decisions of his premiership. In the seat of power, but Boris Johnson will be physically out of the front line over the next 10 days, potentially covering the final phase of Brexit negotiations. The Prime Minister will be allowed no further than his flat and his office in Downing Street, where he'll have to work alone. So, no chance for aides to pass handwritten notes in any crunch Zoom calls with the EU. Britain's chief negotiator David Frost has returned to Brussels, talking of recent progress. But he says the talks may still fail.
At least one thing is clear. Boris Johnson won't be leaving this building anytime soon. As for the chances of a deal with the EU, well, there's less clarity on that. Boris Johnson is hoping for a deal, but he's saying that the UK can prosper if the EU fails to recognise the UK as an independent sovereign country. Brexiteer Tories are saying that they're getting encouraging noises from inside this building, but they'll be examining the small print.
If a deal emerges at the 11th hour, it will involve movement by both sides in the two most difficult areas. On fishing, the UK is prepared to allow reduced but substantial EU access to UK waters, but the EU would have to agree that this could be changed, perhaps every 5 years. And the UK would agree not to undercut the EU on areas such as labour laws and state subsidies. This could be done through a so-called non-regression clause, a pledge not to lower standards. The EU may agree this can be policed on the UK side by a UK body, perhaps the Competition and Markets Authority. A former Brexit minister is not holding his breath for a deal.
I think it's going to be challenging. There's no doubt that the EU seem to be very reluctant, for example, to move very much on the issue of fisheries, which of course is one of their own red lines. In addition, of course, there's the crucial issue from the British point of view of sovereignty. And it's taken a long time for, as David Frost said, the European Union to internalise the fact that we are no longer an EU member state, but an independent country. So all this has caused huge delay, and I think that at the moment it's looking marginally more like there will be no deal than there will be a deal.
France's former European Affairs Minister is still hopeful.
We are very near to the end point. We are very near to the moment of truth. And I do hope that we are able to reach an agreement that is beneficial to both sides, even if it will never be as beneficial as having the UK as a member state. But we fully understand that it was a sovereign democratic decision. We respect it, we implement it, but we don't want to hurt our economies, to hurt our workers because of the consequences of this decision.
Happier times as the UK agreed the terms of its departure. A different atmosphere now as the two sides struggle to agree a future partnership.
Nick Watwell, Dr Philippa, Whitford and Damian Green are still with me, and we're joined too by the Conservative MP and long-time campaigner for Brexit, Peter Bone, and indeed tomorrow morning's Sun will suggest that there could be a deal next Tuesday. Peter Bone, first of all, they may not be your guys, Lee Kane and Dominic Cummings, but they're your kind of Brexiteers, and with them gone, do you think there is more chance of negotiation from the UK side?
They're not my sort of Brexiteers. I walked out of Vote Leave because of Mr Cummings, so you're wrong on that to start.
Well, I mean, on hard red lines.
Look, I think there's going to be a deal. As you rightly have just said, I think it's going to be within the next 7 days. It's in the interests of both the EU and the UK. They're very close to a deal. It seems silly now not to complete it, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of compromise on the areas where there's some disagreement at the moment. But I think it will happen.
So you're now saying that if there is compromise on state aid alignment, and indeed if there's compromise on fisheries, which was the big totemic thing of Leave EU, was the big totemic thing, we're an island nation, we need to protect our waters. You're now saying that if there's compromise on that, you would back that, and that would be a good Brexit trade deal.
Well, I think what happened a few weeks ago was the British government said, OK, it's going to be no deal because the EU are refusing to move their position. If the EU have compromised on their position, I'm sure a deal can be done. And they realise, the EU realise, it's very much in their interest to do it. They sell £100 billion more of goods to us than we do to them. And of course, free trade, the benefit of free trade, it's better for consumers and business unemployment.
So let's be clear, Peter Bone, you are now saying that you accept alignment with EU rules on things like state aid and on things like any sweeteners or whatever, to make sure that there is a level playing field. You actually are moving towards that now. That is not a red line anymore.
I don't think you could possibly interpret what I said as that. Clearly, we're an independent nation. We can't have rules and regulations made by the EU, and the EU can't have rights over our fishing. But as you said, they'll probably be allowed, the EU will be allowed to take some fishing from our waters until our British fleets build up again. But we can't have rules and regulations from the EU. That's the whole point of coming back and taking control of our laws and borders and waters and trade. There's no compromise on any of that, but the fine detail can be changed.
There has to be compromise on that. You talk about fine detail, and this is interesting because it's almost sophistry, isn't it? What is the negotiating position that maybe moves us an inch, and what is just the fine detail? I think, are people prepared to blur the lines now to get a deal?
Well, I think everyone realises a deal is a good thing, and they've got to reach an agreement that's suitable for the UK and suitable for the EU. I think they're very close. I don't think these talks would have continued unless they were very close. And the fact that Lord Frost is reported to have told the Prime Minister tonight to expect a deal within 7 days, I think it's all good news. And I don't think we should be doom and gloom about this. I think we're on the verge of having a comprehensive free trade agreement, which is in our interest and the EU's interest.
And if it could not be completed in time, would you be prepared to accept a technical extension in order just to get it done?
No more extensions. Look, the thing that I find strange is that this had to, we had the EU saying it had to be done by the 31st of October, or it couldn't be ratified. That's been extended. Well, the only reason for extension must be that they're very close. But this cannot go on. Business needs to have certainty of what the trading relationship will be at the 31st of December. So I think we're in the, I wouldn't be surprised if a deal wasn't completed this week.
Damian Green, do you have any concerns at all about the fact that we could be busting what were Boris Johnson's red lines to get a deal done?
I've argued all the way along that it's better to leave with the deal. As somebody who campaigned for Remain, I accepted the result of the referendum and said, OK, let's get a deal. So I'm delighted to hear Peter say that he wants a deal, because he and I are now on the same page on this issue, which is it's a historic first.
It's a historic first. Well, there's lots of historic firsts tonight. But let's just talk about that then, because what Peter Bone is saying is we are not going to accept EU rules and regulations. But the truth is, if you are moving towards some kind of alignment on state aid rules and rules on a level playing field, you are, in essence, accepting the EU position as they would be accepting yours.
Well, what we're not saying, we'll set our own rules and we'll have the freedom to change them in the future. And if we do change them in the future, then that may well have consequences in other parts. But I think the idea that a Conservative government in particular would not sign a deal because we wanted to subsidise industries too much is a bit weird. The state aid rules were, date back to Margaret Thatcher. She, saw the logic of trying to keep failed industries going with subsidies.
What has been all the fuss about this then? Because you're both, I sort of expected you would be less, but Peter Bone too is now being in this exceptional position of, yes, we are going to negotiate our way into this in the next 10 days. It's all going to be fine.
Well, because there are a lot of areas that have to be negotiated. Most of them have been. We've got, as you say, state aids and fish. Oddly enough, fish, I think, is one of our stronger negotiating points, in that if we don't come to a deal, then the French fishermen and the Spanish fishermen and so on have no rights at all in British waters. They don't want that. They know there's got to be some sort of deal on fish. And yet Simon Coveney, the Irish farmer, said that there's been no movement on fisheries since the summer. That presumably is just another negotiating ploy then. Well, I think think because it's such an understandably emotive issue on both sides of the channel, that this was always going to be one of the ones that was settled last, and so there may not have been much formal.
So your understanding would be then that Scottish fishermen from all over the UK will be able to sell their catches into the EU in entirety if they want at the end of next week, by the end of next week's trip.
I hope that where fishermen, I mean, as you say, the Scottish fishing fleet's very important, sell their fish is a matter for them as a business matter. It's a question of what they're allowed to catch.
Well, let's ask Philippa Whitford, would you be very glad to have a deal on fisheries then? Because, as you very well know, lots of Scottish fishermen weren't very keen on the last deal that was done in the EU over fisheries.
Well, I've got a fishing constituency here on the West Coast, and my fishermen largely don't gain anything from leaving the common fisheries policy because the seafood they catch wasn't a quota catch. But 85% of our langoustine go to Europe. And whether there's a deal or no deal, what we are going to have is the enormous costs of bureaucracy and delay at borders that a lot of them are beginning to think is going to put them out of business. So, you know, the kind of fishing side of it may benefit some of the big trawler fleet owners in the northeast of Scotland, but it doesn't help the inshore fishermen on the west of Scotland. And I mean, I agree, I think there probably will be a deal, but at this late stage, I think it's going to be a very thin, low deal. And a lot of the bureaucracy, delay and problems for business is going to happen regardless. And Peter and I sit on the Brexit committee, and he talks about, you know, business needs surety. We have listened to sector after sector, from pharmaceutical, road haulier, to farming, to fishermen, the whole works, talking about the fact we're not ready.
Let me ask you, just to move that on slightly. At the weekend, the SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, said there must be a referendum next year. Do you think there should be another referendum on Scottish independence next year? And the reason I ask that will have implications for the EU. So tell me, do you think there should be a referendum next year?
Well, obviously, I'd like a referendum as soon as possible. But at the moment, the Scottish Government are focused on the pandemic. But, I mean, it is clear, but we talked about a few months ago, the idea of devolution being rolled back. But also underlying that, the people of Scotland voted against Brexit. And we've been treated...
Do you see, the reason I ask you that, Philippa, I'm so sorry because we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you this. Do you see a referendum next year on Scottish independence as a way back into the EU?
Well, obviously, that's one of the aims whenever the referendum would be suitable to have. Our aim would be to return to the EU.
Thank you all very much indeed.